Shakespeare scholars often define Hamlet as a tragedy. But what makes it a tragedy? Stephen Booth defines tragedy as the word by which the mind designates, and thus in part denies, its helplessness before a concrete, particular, and thus undeniable demonstration of the limits of human understanding. With this meaning, Hamlet, by its very definition as a tragedy, cannot reside in a category. Some may argue that Hamlet's questionable sexuality falls into this category of the unknown and the misunderstood. Reading Hamlet in this specific way can unveil Hamlet's exhibited attraction to both men and women. This especially presents itself in his relationship with Horatio, one which exists as more romantic than a first glance at the text might suggest. Reading Hamlet through this lens transforms the already tragic story into a tragic queer love story, one that stirs deeply personal and emotional feelings in the audience. Interpreting Hamlet in this way, as an untold love story, supports Stephen Booth's idea that the genre of tragedy can never truly be labeled, and remains beyond our comprehension. Some scholars have analyzed Horatio's character as one full of inconsistencies. But these inconsistencies overlook the idea that Horatio might act out of love for Hamlet. Alex Newell presents the idea that Horatio first appears as a soldier figure with Marcellus and Bernardo, then turns into a school friend of Hamlet's, and later also appears increasingly as a courtier who resides at Elsinore because he is a friend of the prince. To Newell, these stand out as inconsistencies in Shakespeare's writing of Horatio. But by pairing these inconsistencies with the idea that Horatio might be in love with Hamlet and vice versa, they begin to seem more like believable character actions. A 2014 performance of Hamlet in South Africa directly addressed these inconsistencies. The director and actor for Hamlet writes that he thought about how does Horatio, who is not Danish and has only recently arrived at the castle, know so much about the historical and political situation in Denmark? Horatio's comfortability around the soldiers, Marcellus and Bernardo, could possibly occur because of his friendship with Hamlet. Perhaps he visits Elsinore often because of this friendship. An equally possible explanation for Horatio's comfortability lies in pushing this friendship a step further. Horatio might have romantic attraction for Hamlet. The director comes to this same conclusion, writing that Hamlet and Horatio are confidants, lovers. This interpretation successfully pushes aside the inconsistencies presented by Newell, and instead suggests that Horatio needs much more exploring as a character, especially when it comes to his relationship with Hamlet. The text shows that Hamlet sees Horatio as a friend. In their first interaction in the play, Hamlet expresses to Horatio, "I am glad to see you well." When Horatio describes himself as Hamlet's poor servant, Hamlet corrects him, "Sir, my good friend, I'll change that name with you." This conversation reveals their relationship to be one of friends, close enough that Horatio will come to see Hamlet's father's funeral, but not necessarily close enough for Horatio to view himself on the same social level as Hamlet. They are both upper-class individuals, but Hamlet is a prince, and Horatio notes that difference in class over and over throughout the play. Some may argue that Hamlet does not consider their friendship significantly important, as he seemingly forgets Horatio's name at first. "Horatio, or do I forget myself?" However, this also reads as the kind of humor that two friends often engage in. It is very likely that this particular interaction is Hamlet joking around with his friend. The way Hamlet addresses Horatio and entrusts him with information about the ghost further supports the idea that he considers Horatio a close friend. Hamlet speaks to both Marcellus and Horatio when he says, "And now, good friends, give me one poor request." He addresses both of them as friends, and additionally asks them to keep the secret of the ghost, which shows the deep level of trust he has in Horatio. Horatio proves his loyalty to Hamlet in this same scene, by promising, "What is't, my lord, we will." He responds possibly as a poor servant, but also possibly as a good friend. Horatio does not use as explicit terms as Hamlet does on how he views their relationship, instead using phrases that emphasize his respect of Hamlet as a person of higher class. When Hamlet greets Horatio with, "What ho, Horatio?" Horatio responds, "Here, sweet lord, at your service." While Hamlet uses Horatio's first name, Horatio stresses their class difference with the word lord, and by offering his service. However, his use of the word sweet may possibly expose a subtle double meaning. Sweet could mean a friendly, affectionate form of respect. Or it could mean Horatio sees Hamlet as important, precious, and maybe even beloved. Horatio cleverly uses this word with multiple meanings to have plausible deniability. He may show his love for Hamlet, but he does so under the guise of just showing respect. Furthermore, after Horatio says this, Hamlet expresses how much he appreciates Horatio and the friendship that they have. "Horatio, thou art e'en as just a man as ever my conversation cope withal." Hamlet shows here how he sees Horatio as the ideal man and the best man Hamlet has ever known. Hamlet continuously attempts to get Horatio to see how much he means to him, and Horatio continuously attempts, very subtly, to get Hamlet to see how much he cares for him. Horatio calls Hamlet Lord 42 times throughout the play. 37 of those times, he specifically calls him my lord, and 6 of these times he uses the word good along with my lord. Horatio shows his respect for Hamlet to a degree that almost seems excessive, but this may possibly reveal an underlying message. The repetition could reveal a sign of longing. This would explain why, as the play progresses and as the stakes for Hamlet get higher, Horatio grows more desperate with his longing. He begins to express his affection for Hamlet more freely as the play nears its end. Horatio says, "Good my lord," twice in Act 1, but in Act 5, he says "good my lord" 3 times, as well as "my good lord" once. Horatio's use of subtle and double meanings increase, which may possibly show him becoming more comfortable with letting Hamlet know how he really feels. It could also show his desperation in trying to let Hamlet know, because he can sense the severity of their situation growing. Either way, Horatio slightly changes the way he speaks to Hamlet as the play progresses, opening himself up more and more. Horatio is not the only one with hidden traits that may reveal more to his character. There have been scholarly theories in the past that Hamlet might be homosexual or queer in some way, which gives an added layer to Hamlet's perspective of Gertrude and Claudius's marriage. A queer interpretation of Hamlet might view the marriage as the disillusionment that lies ahead if he follows a conventional heterosexual path. A question arises when it comes to this homosexual interpretation of Hamlet, of whether Hamlet loves Ophelia or ever loved her in the past. La Fontaine writes that Hamlet's apparent feelings for Ophelia never blossoms into anything real. This is a very bold claim to make, although an understandable one. Hamlet does say to Ophelia, "I did love you once," but it is unclear whether or not this is a part of his madness, and it is unclear whether that madness is pretend or real. However, looking at this quotation in context with Hamlet's love letter that Polonius reads aloud, exposes that, at the very least, Hamlet had feelings for Ophelia at one point in time. In the letter he writes, "To the celestial and my soul's idol, the most beautified Ophelia." He describes his feelings of love for her, stating that he thinks very highly of her and her beauty. He then takes it a step further when he writes in the letter, "I have not art to reckon my groans, but that I love thee best." Possibly, Hamlet uses the word groan here in a sexual context, as in he loves Ophelia so much he desires her physically. Because of the way Hamlet treats Ophelia later in the play, these feelings have likely faded by now, with the love letter reflecting the previous height of Hamlet and Ophelia's relationship. Still, this solidifies the idea that Hamlet is not simply homosexual, but likely bisexual or some other variation of queer. Beyond Ophelia, Hamlet has other romantic interests that further push the theory of his bisexuality. He may possibly have a history with Laertes, given the way that Claudius mentions Hamlet to Laertes. In Hamlet's hearing, your sum of parts did not together pluck such envy from him. Claudius tries, and succeeds, and piquing Laertes' interest by suggestively hinting that Hamlet might have an interest in his parts. The Oxford English Dictionary defines parts as a portion of the human body, but it can also more specifically mean the genitals. This could possibly point to a past relationship between Hamlet and Laertes, or at the very least, that one of them has been interested in the other at some point. The extent of their relationship remains unclear, but the text does point to some possible romantic and even sexual tension. For example, the scene where Hamlet joins Laertes in Ophelia's grave and wrestles with him might present homoerotic subtext. The scene could appear like the proverbial wrestling match between very masculine yet mutually attracted males. This interpretation of the text seems to lean towards Hamlet and Laertes having the dynamic of a bitter romantic past. No extensive evidence exists to support this theory, however, and so we remain wondering about the exact details of the past between Laertes and Hamlet. Yet another example remains of Hamlet's interest in a man. When Hamlet sees Fortinbras and his army, he describes Fortinbras as a delicate and tender prince. All of the evidence in this scene points to Fortinbras as a man obsessed with war and control of land. Not usually the type of person who gets described as delicate or tender. And yet, Hamlet chooses to attribute those aspects to him. This, once again, points to Hamlet's attraction to men in addition to women. In modern-day terms, he might be considered bisexual. This word bisexual, however, along with the word homosexual, is very modern, and neither Hamlet nor Shakespeare would have had this word in their lexicon. Some scholars using a modern lens consider Shakespeare himself to be a bisexual man, one who moves over the course of the sequence from desiring a man to desiring a woman. A similar argument can be made for Hamlet. In one specific allusion to Hamlet's hypothetical bisexuality, he tells Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, "Man delights not me, nor woman neither, though by your smiling you seem to say so." This covers all of the previous evidence and summarizes it into one quotation. Hamlet's intense depression, or at least his pretend depression, causes him to lose all interest in men and women. Hamlet must specify his disinterest is in both men and women, which implies that he usually has interest in both men and women. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern appear to know Hamlet well enough to laugh and exchange a smirk of complicity as Hamlet says this. This implies that they know about Hamlet's varied romantic interests, and possibly that they might even suspect his current feelings toward Horatio. Hamlet's romantic interests must be read in between the lines to be fully seen. This likely has something to do with the way the people in his life react when he expresses himself in ways that do not match the societally governed expectations for men. When Hamlet grieves for his father at the beginning of the play, Claudius criticizes him, describing the behavior as unmanly grief. Hamlet internalizes this and represses his feelings, which is highlighted in one of his later soliloquies when he is frustrated at himself for being pigeon-littered and lacking gall. He views himself as too gentle, reflecting the gender roles pushed upon him. With all of that to deal with, it becomes understandable that the hints to his bisexuality remain no more than hints. Claudius and others might see Hamlet as a lesser man if he shows any signs of femininity. And if the wrong people got wind of his possible attraction to Horatio or men in general, the consequences could be disastrous. Hamlet and Horatio both hide their feelings, and both for similar reasons: fear of being found out. Horatio has this fear due to their difference in social class, and Hamlet fears Claudius and other people in positions of power will bring negative repercussions. With that said, evidence still exists throughout the text of their possible feelings for each other. Hamlet states that he holds Horatio in his heart's core, and in his heart of heart. This directly points to how Hamlet views Horatio. He is incredibly important to him. Furthermore, right after stopping Horatio from following him to death, Hamlet tells him, "If thou didst ever hold me in thy heart, tell my story." Here he presents a challenge to Horatio. If you love me, if you ever loved me, keep on living for me. And Horatio keeps on living. As Hamlet finally dies, which in many productions is staged as him dying in Horatio's arms, Horatio says one of his most famous lines. Now cracks a noble heart. Good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. In almost any other context, this quotation would instantly be read as romantic, especially if this scene was presented as being between a man and a woman. In Hayden Rich's 2014 production, this scene ends with Horatio kissing Hamlet. Hayden Rich remarks how the image of Hamlet dying in Horatio's arms, with Horatio intent on drinking the poison too, is reminiscent of the tomb scene in Romeo and Juliet. Hamlet and Horatio have gone through many trials and tribulations, similar to that of a tragic romance, much like Romeo and Juliet. The difference is that at the end of Hamlet, the two lovers never even get the chance to explicitly confess their love to each other. While La Fontaine dismisses the possibility of Hamlet's attraction to multiple genders, he does solidify the possibility of a romantic relationship between Hamlet and Horatio. He specifically points out how their relationship has a sense of missed possibilities of what might have been had they inhabited a different kingdom and a different realm of being. These missed possibilities can be traced throughout the text. For example, in the letter Hamlet sends Horatio while in the process of returning to Elsinore, he writes, I have words to speak in thine ear will make thee dumb, yet that much too light for the bore of the matter. There is something he wants to tell Horatio that he cannot disclose in the letter, that will surprise Horatio, and that is too light for the serious matter of the rest of the letter. This could possibly refer to a confession of his love. As Hamlet dies, he says to Horatio, had I but time, oh, I could tell you, but let it be. This might refer to the same words from the letter, some unsaid message that Hamlet wanted to tell Horatio but never got the chance before he died. Again, a possible love confession. Chances never taken and confessions never said reframe the tragedy of Hamlet as one of a tragic queer love story. This story evokes feelings in an audience, feelings that might not be understood, which connects exactly to how Stephen Booth defines the undefinable genre of tragedy. Hamlet and Horatio's relationship dwells beyond our comprehension because of how much of it we never see. When we do, however, picture Hamlet as bisexual, in love with Horatio, and with Horatio in love with him in return, we reinforce the idea that tragedy renders our human brains helpless in the face of unfathomable circumstances. Tragedy may remain undefinable by nature, but by reading Hamlet as a hidden love story between two men, humanity comes closer to comprehending the incomprehensible. Bet you didn't know I had a blanket on my lap. Hi y'all! First of all, I just want to let you know that in the description of this video, I will have the full essay as well as a list of all the sources I used. Unfortunately, many of these sources are behind a paywall because when I wrote this paper, I was still a student and I had access to a wider variety of databases. If you are a student at a university where they let you have access to scholarly databases, you should be able to access them, maybe? If you don't have that, I'm sorry. I also just want to say thank you all so much for your support on this new channel. For those of you who are new here, hi, hello, my name is Katie. For those of you coming over here from Katie Edits, welcome! We're going to do so many fun things like this here. Thank you all so much for watching. I love you all so much, and I will see you later. Bye, y'all!